Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. We've gone back into our Portland studio for the first time. We've been recording out of our office lately, and so we're going back into our Open Signal PDX studio, which has an amazing facility. And we have an exciting show for you tonight with guests all over the country, from Alaska and Hawaii to Florida and Virginia. So stay tuned as we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight's out of Minnesota. Lawmakers have resolved differences between House-backed and Senate-backed marijuana legalization measures. Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz says he intends to sign it into law. Minnesota becomes the 23rd state to legalize and regulate the use and sale of cannabis by those ages 21 and older. The bill permits adults to purchase up to 2 ounces from state-licensed retailers, as well as smaller quantities of concentrates and edibles. Home cultivators can have up to 8 plants and possess up to 2 pounds of cannabis in private. The bill also facilitates the automatic review and expungement of records for those previously convicted of certain marijuana-related violations. The majority of Minnesota voters support repealing marijuana prohibition and replacing this failed policy with legalization and regulation. Passage of this legislation is the result of years of grassroots activism by consumers and stakeholders. Minnesota's regulators will license commercial cannabis growers, retailers, and delivery services. On-site consumption will be allowed at certain permitted events and places. Municipal officials will be able to impose regulations regarding the total number of cannabis businesses and their locations, but they may not prohibit their operations. Retail cannabis sales will be taxed at what I think is a reasonable 10%. Adults in Minnesota may begin legally possessing cannabis as of August 1st, 2023. State officials will also begin the process reviewing and expunging records at that time. Minnesota is poised to become the 3rd state this year to enact marijuana legalization, in addition to Delaware, which passed it in April, establishing stores there, and in Maryland, which has also allowed dispensaries throughout Maryland. In Washington, D.C., officials with the U.S. Department of Transportation finalized a new rule authorizing commercially licensed drivers the option to undergo oral fluid testing as an alternative to urinalysis. I think this is a much better option than the current system. Since 2020, over 100,000 truck drivers have tested positive for past exposure to marijuana. Those who fail their test are required to enter a return to work program, which includes passing a drug test in order to have their licenses reinstated. However, only about 1/4 of those with drug test failures have done so, resulting in a driver shortage and supply chain issues. Saliva testing typically identifies residual traces of THC for up to 24 hours following marijuana exposure, a period of time beyond the window of cannabis-related impairment, but one that's far shorter than the timeline associated with urine testing or blood testing. Ellen Comp, a past guest here on this show, and last year, and the California Normal Deputy Director said, quote, "While oral swab tests do not necessarily correlate with impairment from cannabis, they're a better predictor of recent use than our urine test, which can pick up inactive THC metabolites for several weeks after use, and which have been required for truck drivers up until now. This long-awaited move by the Department of Transportation should help with the country's supply chain issues, while advancing employment rights for legal and responsible cannabis users without jeopardizing roadside safety." End quote. Good job, Ellen. In recent months, lawmakers in several states, including California and New York, have amended their employment laws so that most state employers may no longer terminate workers solely on the basis of positive drug tests for the presence of THC metabolites. The full text of the Department of Transportation's forthcoming regulations appears right now online in the Federal Register. Out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, a majority of physicians say they lack the skills to adequately counsel patients on the potential use of medical cannabis, according to a 2023 survey published by the journal Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research. They surveyed 244 physicians regarding their willingness to talk about medical cannabis. Meanwhile, only 18% of patients believe their primary care providers are knowledgeable about cannabis-specific health-related issues. The full text of this study, physicians' attitudes and practices regarding cannabis and recommending medical cannabis use, appears in Cannabis Research and Cannabinoid Research. Our next and last story is out of Washington, D.C. Republicans blocked a procedural vote that would have advanced legislation, Senate Bill 326, the Veterans Administration Medicinal Cannabis Research Act, to the floor of the United States Senate. All but 8 GOP members voted against the bill's advancement, assuring that it would not meet the 60-vote threshold necessary to move forward under the Senate rules. The measure had previously passed unanimously out of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee with bipartisan support. That's the end of our news segment tonight. Our show tonight is about veterans and cannabis. We have Al Byrne, a former Navy veteran, who is also the founder of Patients Out of Time and past director of National Normal. We have Michael Kravitz in Virginia, who is a longtime cannabis veterans activist and has been working with the United Nations and the World Health Organization, which has recently descheduled cannabis to allow its use for medical patients. We're talking to Justin Hanley with Care Wailua in Hawaii about his veterans programs. I'm also talking with Pearson Crosby in Alaska, who is on the Veterans Action Council. And we have a couple of psilocybin facilitators that were just recently licensed. Jeanette Small in Bend, Oregon. And then in our studio, we'll have Willie T., and who is a licensed psilocybin facilitator now, and Paula Noel McVie, a cannabis medicine producer. So stay tuned for a great show. If you are a loved one or looking for help finding a doctor who can help you get a medical marijuana permit, you should call our office. We have doctors all over the United States. And so with cannabis experts helping patients, call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. And now here's our show about veterans and medical cannabis use. Keep watching and help us restore hemp. Good night.
Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have an exciting show for you tonight. This is our first time back in the studio since the pandemic in 2023, February of 2023. And we have a technically challenging show tonight. We have a number of people on Zoom and several guests here in the studio in Portland, Oregon. And so I'd like to introduce our guests here, but first I want to tell you our subject tonight is veterans and plant medicine and self-care and about the introduction of the Veterans Safe Harbor Act in the legislature. We're going to be supporting that House Bill in Oregon. It's House Bill 3369 as well. But we'll go ahead and have our studio audience give a little introduction themselves. Go ahead. We have Paula Noel.
Hi there. I'm Dr. Paula McPhee. I have a business called Backdoor Medicine, and I'm also on the Oregon Cannabis Commission Research and Leadership Subcommittee.
Hi, I'm Willie T. I'm a recent graduate of the Psilocybin Facilitator Program here in Oregon, and we are also the Psilocybin Facilitator Association as well.
Now I'd like to also introduce our online guests. We'll start with another facilitator for psilocybin that's been recently approved, Jeanette Small. Welcome to the show, Jeanette. Okay. What about Pearson Crosby? Can you hear me? No. And I can't really make out the other person. It's a silhouette. Now Pearson Crosby's disappeared there. Okay.
That's how you know it's live.
That's Joshua Hanley. Now he's gone. Okay. So he tried, at least. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the history of this show. I've been asked to give a little synopsis of this show. We've been doing cable access television since 1996. This is we're going to record show 1149 and 1150 tonight. We've had all sorts of guests on the show over the years, everyone from Jack Hare many times to Keith Stropp from Normal, John Trudell, famous Native American activist, and many other guests. But tonight we're going to talk about veterans and cannabis. So I'd like to, let's see if we can get Al in there. Hey, Al, can you hear me? Al. Hello, Al. No, Al cannot hear me. Al, go. I would say, Al, introduce yourself. But apparently there's an issue on our soundboard there. Hello, Al. Okay. I hear a lot of stuff going on in the studio back there.
You know they're getting it done.
I am not used to having Zoom guests here. This was something that was proposed by some of the people who had us bring this show together. And so, but let's go ahead and talk about veterans in cannabis. You, Paul, have been working with suppository medicine. Do you treat veterans?
I treat veterans. I treat children. I treat elders. But, you know, the veterans are a category or an area that I'm finding seeking help and asking for help. A lot of times I work with people who are family members or caregivers of veterans to make that connection to cannabis. So I really like to be a resource for veterans and for their caregivers, because that's really who reaches out to me first.
Well, let's see if we can bring in, I see the guests there. We're going to see if we can bring in sound with them. Jeanette Small, can you hear me? No, and she's gone. What about Al Byrne? Can you hear me? No. Okay. Well, Willie T, you just got your facilitator license, so you haven't really practiced yet. Tell me what it takes to become a psilocybin facilitator.
Well, it takes a lot of work. I went into it thinking it was going to be some easy classes, but it was definitely a very long period of classes that covered a whole wide range of everything doing with psilocybin. You know, from
Who
history.
was the teacher? What?
We graduated from the Changa Institute.
Tell me about the Changa Institute. I've never heard of them.
It was first started by Lisa Gusberg. Forgive me if I misspelled her name, missaid her name here. But she started the institute, and she selected over 1,500 applicants, and somehow I made it into the top 15. So lucky me, I guess. We were an accelerated program, so we went to school 4 to 5 days a week, most weeks, doing homework and everything to prepare ourselves for this. And of course, once we got done, we had to pass a state exam. And after we passed our state exams, we had to pay our fees, and now we're just waiting for service center licenses to get open, and we're waiting for manufacturers to start manufacturing. We're really excited, though, because, you know, when it comes to vets, you know, the VA has started to look into psilocybin studies and therapy for PTSD. You know, some of those studies are going to be done here in Portland, and we're really looking forward to what this could do for, you know, self-care, self-healing for the vets and everybody.
Right. I'm going to try again to see if we can reach out to our online guests. Jeanette Small, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
And we can hear you too. And what about Al Byrne? Can you hear me? Al, can you hear me?
He's talking.
Yes, Paul, I can. But the first couple of minutes, you were dead.
Okay. Well, we've got a show about veterans here, and so we have some veteran activists from around the country. Al Byrne, you're in Virginia, right, or is it Maryland?
No, I've permanently relocated to the Panhandle of Florida.
Oh, okay. And then Jeanette Small, you're in Bend, Oregon, and we have Pearson Crosby. Pearson, you're up in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's have each of you introduce yourself. We'll start, and hold it, there's one more. Jason Hanley. Can you hear me, Jason?
Hear you loud and clear. We're all tied in over here in Hawaii.
Great. Where are you, on Oahu or another island?
I'm actually on Oahu and in the hospital waiting to give birth with a child. It's a pretty crazy experience, so I'm honored to be here, and we're just sitting in the waiting room.
Well, congratulations. So your wife's in labor now.
Yeah, we love the vets, and this is very important to me.
So let's talk about your organization, Care Wailua, I believe it's called, right?
Yes, it is. Yes,
Tell
it
our
is.
audience
Yeah.
about that and how you're interacting with veterans.
Sure. Care Wailua was established about 2015 as a medical patient cannabis farm. Just a quick story in Hawaii. We're still, each card holder, a 329 card holder is licensed, can grow 10 plants. And we've been building a community of plant growers at our farm to get people compassionate medicine and affordable medicine, as well as massive education, direction, how to use cannabis and things of that nature. And so we are now, Care Wailua is the largest medical cannabis patient-based farm in Hawaii with over 2,000 patients. We are also the leading advocacy group over here fighting the policy and the bills in Hawaii right now to get the medical program up and going and fighting the power of privatized dispensaries and stuff like that. So we've been doing a lot of work over here, and then we're probably about 40% vets. And then I'm also a 10th Mountain Infantry 3-year honorable vet, as well as a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service retired biologist. So a lot going on over here.
I see. Yeah, I'm a veteran myself with service-connected disability. Paid my way through school long ago. Now,
Nice.
Let's go to Jason, not Jason, but Pearson Crosby. Pearson, tell us about your organization up in Fairbanks.
Well, I don't have a organization per se that is just connected to Alaska. I work with the Veterans Action Council. There's a group of veterans nationally and internationally that work on whole plant medicine legislation, and our motto is access for all. And we do our best to try to push some of these topics into the lawmakers in front of them. And we are an ad hoc organization. We don't file for 501c3, but we come together. None of us are paid. We work together and try to get things done as a collective.
I see. You just recently came back with Michael Kravitz, who is trying to get into our Zoom here right now from Vienna. You want to tell us about what you were doing in Vienna?
I wasn't in Vienna.
Okay.
I'll let Michael
I thought you were. I'm
speak
sorry.
on that. But no, we all work together. When one of us is somewhere, we're all there, and we do our best to support each other in anything that has to do with getting veterans access to things that should be accessible to everyone.
I see. And you also have a delivery service there, don't you?
Yeah. So one of the first businesses I started back in 2018 was a cannabis delivery service throughout the state of Alaska. It was
That's
during
a big
the infancy
territory.
of, yes, it was. It was interesting. We'll just put it that way. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and got away with it legally.
All right. Well,
Glad
congratulations.
to be here.
Well, now I want to have Al Byrne introduce yourself. I've known Al going back to the early 80s when you were on the board of directors of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Most recently, I've been on your podcast, Veterans Concerns, I think it's called. How are you doing tonight, Al?
I'm doing fine, Paul, and it's nice to see you and talk with you guys again.
It's
And
good.
I see you let Kravitz in. I suppose you have to. But let him talk last, because Pearson and I know once you get him going, you can't shut the guy up. You can't do it. So you've kind of said where it's been for me. I am a veteran. I served 24 years in the United States Navy. I retired from the Navy. Wonderful experience, except for those that weren't wonderful. After I got out of the Navy, I worked for the Agent Orange Commission and the Veterans Administration as a counselor, almost exclusively for combat veterans from Vietnam. And through that experience, my own experience in Vietnam, and then working as a counselor, I learned a lot about post-traumatic stress. I say that again, post-traumatic stress. I've dropped the D.
Yeah, I agree.
Most veterans dislike a lot the fact that they are having a disorder.
Well,
to them and me, it is hardly that.
If
And
you have a
medically,
bunch of bombs drop
you can
around you and explosions and people shooting at you and you shooting people, I think it's not a disorder to be severely affected by that. It's a normal reaction. It'd be a disorder if you didn't have a reaction, right?
Yes, you just said my sentence. Thank you.
Okay.
It's exactly right, Paul. We agree completely. So anyway, I learned a lot about that. Over the years, I was on the board of directors of Normal. I actually ran Normal as an executive director for 2 or 3 years, as secretary, and did a lot of stuff. And I'll take credit right here for giving the government, the federal government, a lot of trouble. When I got to Normal, the Normal was a legalization outfit. Still is, should be. No disagreement. But along the lines, in the early 80s, I met this terrific, wonderful character named Jack Herr. And I also had experience with medical cannabis in my own family. And so with the assistance of the board, Normal actually started to very, very aggressively about 1990 divide the issue into 3, which we have today. Legalization, the medical use, of course, hemp, etc. And so from there, I moved aggressively into veterans. We introduced the veterans conversation into the medical conversation probably about the mid-90s. It became very, very aggressive in our conversation after the year 2000. That was when Mike Kravitz is over here. Mike and I joined together back in those days. And in the past, whatever the hell it's been, Mike, 25 years I think Mike and I have led the charge, if you will, been the point of the spear, walk point in military language for this medical issues that comes to veterans. And Pearson is one of our cohorts. Pearson and Mike and I converse virtually weekly and have been for a couple of years. The organization that Pearson references, Veterans Action Council, has had some amazing success because nobody owns us. Nobody owns us. We don't take money. Nobody's the boss. Everything's by consensus. We speak for veterans without exaggeration, but with sincerity. And in doing so, we have addressed the World Health Organization, who have recognized us and said thank you. We've addressed the United Nations. Mike is the expert on that. I'll let him go into that later, and you should listen to what he says about the United Nations. But we have addressed the United Nations as veterans, not representing just United States veterans, veterans all over the world. We're all the same. Yeah. You know, I got post-traumatic stress in Vietnam, I admit it. Mm-hmm. and so does the guys that fought for Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
It's not different.
Right.
It's not different. So anyway, I've tried to work the veterans issue into where it is today. I'm very grateful to Paul and you for talking about this issue tonight. I hope it's repeated more and more often. I'll let Mike go into it because I've talked enough. But the Veterans Action Council, as Pearson has stated very well, is for everybody. There's nobody left out here. We're warriors. We don't leave anybody behind. Dead or wounded, they're coming with us. And right now, we've got veterans, brothers and sisters, that are being left behind. Totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable.
Al, didn't you weren't you also involved in starting Patients Out of Time?
Yeah, well, I did that on the side.
Okay,
yeah,
and your
we
wife
started,
as well, RN Mary Lynn Mather.
We started Patients Out of Time. Yeah, it was... I just got pissed off, and the government started saying, well, everything's anecdotal. Well, fuck you. So I started Patients At a Time, and what we did was we had, these were accredited conferences, accredited by the AMA and the ANA, the American Medical Association, the American Nurses Association, let me run a conference on their behalf that would give continuing education credits to doctors and nurses. And we did so starting in 2000. That was Patients At a Time. And that busted the Fed's ass too.
Yeah.
They didn't know what the hell to do with that. Like up until then, it had been, oh, you guys are just a bunch of talkers. And all of a sudden, we parade out on the straight PhDs and MDs and patients who say the truth. And then the AMA and the ANA says, yes, stamp of approval. And that was a ball buster for the feds. That started in 2000. It's gone now. It's okay. Did its thing. It's been replaced multiple times, and that was the whole idea.
Right.
Thank you for asking, Paul. But from the veterans' perspective, that was also important because it gave the veterans' voice some science behind it.
Yeah.
Which is now incredible. I mean, the science, worldwide science, let me go on, I guess, if you guys are okay with it. But, you hear all this bullshit from the politicians and everybody else about there's no goddamn research. Well, the hell there isn't. There might not be any U.S. research, but there's a whole goddamn world out there.
Yeah.
And in that world, there's 25,000 pages of peer-reviewed research on cannabis. There's 27, 28, 29 countries in the world that have cannabis in their pharmacopoeia, saying it's medicine. We got 40 states or something and territories and D.C. It's medicine. And these fools in D.C., they're fools. Sit there and say, what? Well, I'll tell you why they say that, because they don't know what the hell they're doing. They're cops. They're lawyers.
Yeah.
They haven't been in medical school. They haven't been in nursing school. They don't know what the hell the endocannabinoid system is.
It's all about money.
There's also another law I recommend these people about is that if you don't have a medical degree, it's against the law to practice medicine.
Yeah. Well, it's all about
they do it
money.
all the time.
Right? It's all about money and power and the continued centralization of economic and political control. Something I've been saying on this show for the 27 years we've been doing it. But I really want to thank you for your lifetime of activism. A lot of people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're like the beginning, and you helped." No, I came, and there was a group of people, including Al Byrne and his lovely wife, Mary Lynn Mather, and Jack Hare, and Norman Zinberg at Harvard, many other people. John Sajo here in Oregon, Dr. Fred Orther, just to name a few. But let's jump over to Michael Kravitz. Michael, can you hear me?
I can.
Good. So tell us about your work and introduce yourself.
Wow, that's an open question.
You've been on the show several times over the years. both in studio and during the pandemic. And I was on your show, you're in Al Burns' show. Is it Veterans Concern?
Veterans Voices.
Veterans Voices. So, yeah, it's an opening question, and you've got the floor. Michael Kravitz.
It's much love, much love. I really do love you all, and I appreciate coming back to your show anytime I can. I've always tried to, all right, let me start over. The work that we do at the United Nations really, in a way, doesn't even exist. I mean, there is no work at the United Nations. It's the work that we do locally, Oregon, New Jersey, wherever, that I take to the United Nations. And that's a direct connection. And then hopefully take back information about what's going on inside those walls, so we don't have a situation, like Las Vegas, where what happens here stays here at the UN, because it really is hard to understand what's going on behind those walls. You have to have an ID card to get in. And that was, I guess, the biggest part of my work early on, going from 1997 to about 2008, was getting those badges for the reform movement, for the cannabis movement, to be able to get inside the UN and participate and be involved. I honestly have to tell you that I didn't think that change was going to come in our lifetime. I thought I was planting the seeds for another generation to be
Tell
able to
our
participate
audience
in
about
UN.
the change, because we haven't touched on the change in international law that you helped spark up, as well as you sparked that bowl.
Well, that's the next phase of my work, really. And it was very seamless. About 2008, we had a huge summit in Vienna. We culminated a lot of the, groundwork for what's called non-governmental organizations. That's us, to participate at the UN and to play a role. They just, on a side note, the UN really does appreciate us there, because we can give them a point of view of the actual need of citizens around the world, what's actually going on, often unfiltered, and they get more of a filtered version from government. So they really do actually appreciate our input. 2009, we had a gift given to us in the form of a prohibitionist attempt to outlaw cannabis seeds. I don't know if you even remember this, but it was a big attempt by Japan to outlaw cannabis seeds. Well, that backfired. And what it did was it created an open door for the World Health Organization to consider cannabis from A to Z. And we got deeply involved in that. We being myself personally, I made like 7 trips to Geneva, Switzerland, to participate in these meetings. But we, the medicinal cannabis movement, brought everything. I mean, we brought everything. We had all our science, all our researchers, all our doctors, all our stakeholders. We literally brought them all. National Normal helped us bring hundreds of thousands of individual comments through the FDA. We brought individual people to speak directly to the expert committee over in Geneva. We had testimony that we compiled into reports and we gave them in Geneva. I mean, we really laid it on thick. And these cats really, soaked it all in. I have to say that the expert committee at the World Health Organization is a real expert committee. And once we actually challenged, there was one political figure on the committee, Bertha Madras. I don't know if you know Professor Madras, but if we hadn't intervened and she stayed on the committee, we might not have gotten anywhere. But in 2020, these recommendations from the World Health Organization, when they're handed off to the UN, it doesn't take a consensus. Like, to change the world drug policy, to change the treaty takes consensus. But if you can get the World Health Organization to change the baseline based on evidence, that just takes a simple vote. And we were able to lobby countries and work with different member states and get enough countries to actually support it to change the treaty. And if you had asked me in 1997 if I thought we were going to change the world before we changed the United States policy, especially when I thought the USA, legalization was going to drive the rest of the world's, reform. So I had it totally backwards. We got the world changed first. And you might, just to finish it, put a fine point on it, what you might call our change at the UN, because it's, cannabis is still in the treaty, there's still work to be done, but medicinal cannabis is no longer an issue. It's supported by the World Health Organization and legal by treaty, absolutely supported by treaty. And really, the treaty at this point should be working as a mechanism to, by agreement of all these countries that signed it, ensure access to cannabis. It reverses. And just, we've been working in the Veterans Action Council. This is connected in my brain, so I'll just throw it at you. But that's the really neat transition we're about to face, where the federal government's job has been to prohibit cannabis, keep it away from anything, interstate commerce, we can go right into your backyard if you even have a joint. But wait, The minute we legalize it, it's going to be the government's job to make sure that no one infringes on interstate commerce. Wow, what a 180-degree reversal. We call it the dormant commerce clause. It's going to be really coming in and biting a lot of things. So this is really interesting time.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your work. Tell us how it was rescheduled by the World Health Organization, because that's something that happens on an international level, but it takes a while for that to filter down. I know it was opposed by both Russia and China, but American, European countries were in favor of it. Was it a close vote?
It was an extremely close vote. And if the United States hadn't voted in favor of it, we wouldn't have won. How about that for close? So the really weird thing about that is, though, it's had an impact all over the world. It had a very strong impact in the European Union. It's had an incredibly strong impact throughout the world. Colombia is working on, world commerce of medicinal grade cannabis. I mean, it's out the gate, and Canada has a very robust international medicinal cannabis. This is all very legal, absolutely legal at every level, medicinal cannabis industry now that is supported by law. We in the United States are lagging behind medicinal cannabis consumers in the United States because the federal law is still intransigent and still lying to us. The federal government's position is a codified lie. It says that cannabis has no medical value, and it's written right into the law, Schedule 1 in the United States.
And the drug czar can't say it's not, right? The drug czar, or the Office of National Drug Control Policy by law can't advocate for the truth about cannabis.
Let me give you, rather than go there, let me give you a little rabbit hole to go down, and I think everyone will really enjoy, because it gives you a little backroom insight that you would not know if you didn't know the Veterans Action Council, if you didn't work with us. Not all our work is publicized. We're not trying to get funded. We're not trying to, pat ourselves on the back. We're trying to get the job done. So we got the change done at the treaty level because our Controlled Substances Act, our federal law, requires the Attorney General to act based on a treaty change. And it specifically says in our Controlled Substances Act that all those other considerations of whether it has accepted medical value or whatever, those are not to be considered. That's actually written into the law in the United States. Treaty change, AG, change schedule to fit. That's how it works. And that happens every year as new drugs come down the pipeline, new bath salts or whatever, new forms of fentanyl. They come down from the treaty level. The AG, puts it right into law. Well, this time he dragged his feet. A whole year later, the Veterans Action Council sent a letter to the Attorney General. 6 months later, we still haven't heard from the Attorney General. We went to the White House and we asked the Office of National Drug Control Policy if they could step in and help us. They did, and they said they would, and they did. And if you saw the president get on TV, he was actually formally passing on our request to the Attorney General. Not really a request. It's federal law that compels the Attorney General to issue an order pursuant to the treaty change. It doesn't tell the Attorney General what to write in the order, but damn it, we want to see the order. We'll argue with what the order says after we see it. How about that? But the order should say at least Schedule 3, 4, or 5. Schedule 2 isn't even on the table, not with Marinol being Schedule 2. So this is a very interesting moment. The drug policy reform movement has been fighting that schedule number in court since 1971. Millions of dollars have been spent on legal fees. We took a little team over to Geneva, found a loophole in the treaty, changed the world, and now it's got the president asking the AG for us to change the schedule number. How's that for cool?
That's pretty darn cool.
Edge.
Thank you. So let's talk for a moment with Jeanette Small. Jeanette Small's here in Oregon, but on another, over in Bend, about a 3.5-hour drive out of Portland. And Jeanette, you were one of the first 3 people, I believe, who got a facilitator's license for psilocybin medicine. Do you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. As the mushroom person in the group here, I feel a little bit out of place, and I just want to say
one more.
That's right. Hi, Willie.
Did you guys go through the same class?
We did.
Yes, we did. We were in the same class. We completed the same thing.
You're alumni.
Yeah, all the things Willie has said, I stand by that. He was right. And I want to say thank you all so much for all the work that you guys have been doing, because I personally am such a big fan of all of the work that you've done. I have benefited from medical marijuana myself. It has made such a huge difference in my life. And let me just tell you a little bit of why I'm, interested in working with veterans, why it is that I'm interested in being part of this conversation here.
Please do.
I myself have not served. However, I am a child of war. I was born in 1982 in the Soviet Union, and about 10 years later, the Union collapsed, and we faced quite a few military conflicts with Russia. Moldova, the country where I was born, was seeking independence and was met with strong resistance from Russia. So my family ended up running and seeking asylum in Germany. I came to the United States at 17 years old by myself later on. So I'm familiar with the experience of post-traumatic stress. I am experienced with, all the different systems that promise help and ultimately fail to deliver the promised help that supposedly is just so easy and accessible. So thank you all so much for all the work that you have been doing. And I would like to build upon that and contribute to, working more, giving more opportunities to people who are suffering with post-traumatic stress through a different plant medicine, through psilocybin.
In terms of, explain to our audience how psilocybin has now been regulated in Oregon, because it's not like you can go to the store and buy some mushrooms and go out on the beach, but you have to have a facilitator, like you and Willie are now licensed facilitators. And I don't think they approved the next step. When can you guys start offering these services, and how is that going to work?
As soon as we have a service center, we're going to be able to start offering services there. So the framework is such that we have manufacturing facilities that have to be licensed, very much like in the cannabis industry. There is going to be a lab that has to be licensed, just like the cannabis industry. And then the product can be utilized in a service center. The client is not able to take the mushrooms and leave with them. Everything that they consume during this administration session has to be consumed on site. And then they have to be in the presence of a licensed facilitator for the duration of their altered experience.
And so that's about minimum 6 to 8 hours? About 6 to 8 hours?
Well, actually, the longest mandated amount of time is 6 hours. Personally, I think 6 hours is not a long enough time. I feel like it should be as long as it takes. Mm-hmm. So, realistically closer to 8, 9 hours, but it really does depend on the individual journey.
I don't know if you know it, but I used to have an office there in Bend on the main drag through town for THCF medical clinics, but we shut that down a few years ago. And so
I remember.
It's right there next to the Purple Kitty. I remember that.
Yep, that's right. I remember that.
Mr. Hanley, is it Jason Hanley or Joshua? I'm kind of confused. I'm sorry. Jason.
It is.
Jason.
It is no problem at all, man. I'm honored to be here. It's Jason Hanley.
Thank you, Jason. I used to have an office in Honolulu as well. We saw probably about 3,000 medical patients, mainly on the Big Island, but also on Kauai and Lahui. And I worked out of an office center there in Honolulu as well. Yeah, I always thought it was strange how the Big Island has about 10 to 15% of the people, but it has about 50% of the medical marijuana permits, where Oahu has 75 to 80% of the people, but it only has about 20% of the medical marijuana cards. The rest being split between Kauai and Maui. But I noticed a different culture on each different island. You must experience that too, right?
Yeah, I think the culture of cannabis here in Hawaii is rooted in this place on every island. There's no doubt about it. I can share stories from kids that grew up on Oahu that were growing Durban hash plant in the sugarcane fields and are now my age of like 54. So
I was in the Army because the Army recruiter said, "How would you like to go to Hawaii?" So I was stationed there at Schofield Barracks, and I bought some very good sinsemilla. Some of the best sinsemilla. Definitely at the time, it was the best I'd ever seen in my life. at that time. And so we're talking 79 and 80 there. But tell us more about Kairwailua, and what is the legislative situation there in Hawaii right now?
Sure, I'll try to keep it a short story. I will go back to your Sensimilia comment and let you know that those strains are still here alive in Hawaii and are still some of the best sativas in the world. And, right now what Kairwailua is trying to do is we're trying to get the cultivation licenses back into those people's hands, into the growers' hands of Hawaii that went through all the Ronald Reagan Operation Green Harvest chaos. And so we're really fighting super hard to just reinvent this medical program here and get, affordable licensing for people and an open market. Come on, guys. This is, basically, Hawaii pushed the dispensary's place in 2015 on a lottery and just really pissed everybody off. And it's just kind of like going back up to the gentleman from Alaska. And I'm telling you what, guys, I haven't been in this meeting. I'm honored to be here. I'm just floored, man, that these connections keep happening, and I'm really excited to be here. Just to let you know. So
great. How is your wife doing? Is she in?
We are hanging in here, man. We're just waiting to be induced here in a few more hours. We're going through the induction process, but it's going slow. But we're all happy and cool, and we're actually watching the Sixers Boston game, so we're all kicking it here.
Well, our prayers and blessings for your wife and your new baby.
Yeah,
I hope it.
So I'll just give you a quickie on Hawaii. You know what I mean? And it's just it's like all you gentlemen, and it's the fools, right? The uneducated. You know what I mean? That are really establishing policy and putting in stuff in place that are really, a lot of these older politicians that are really holding back are leftovers from the Ronald Reagan days. They're really, where a lot of people think it's about money and stuff like that. Yeah, it is a little bit here, but we would all agree that it's a huge vice problem here, and that, Operation Green Harvest did a lot of damage to the people of Hawaii, the Japanese culture of Hawaii that now thinks cannabis doesn't have any medical, deals with it, so that's kind of what we're fighting. But we're excited. We crushed a lot of bills this year. We crushed 3 legalization bills that were hiding behind, getting people out of prison, but letting the dispensaries take the role of licensing and stuff. So we were really excited about that, because this has got to come back to the people, and this has got to be done the right way. We're kind of following the Maine model, where you just build it from the medical society, get the people in power, and let's start opening these cards up and have small craft cannabis, which we think will give veterans like myself, and Hawaii's got a large amount of veterans, capacity, friendship, education, all those things that are needed with this plant that we've seen at Kairwailua just go crazy. I mean, you can cry on our farm every day and just be like, what the hell is happening here? And, we're up to like 2,000 patients. The state of Hawaii's tried to shut us down. They can't do it. So I feel like I'm in here with a bunch of group of outlaws that have changed the world. And I'm just really, I'm honored to be here. To be honest with you, I'm honored. And I know the fight that you guys have gone through and the stress. And you want to talk about some PTSD, how about cannabis policy, guys? That's some ridiculous shit, man. So I'm just stoked to be here, and I'll keep it short. And I'm very honored to keep connecting with all you people. I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, too. It's
Jason,
kind of interesting to
if I can interrupt.
Yeah, please.
Jason, it was so interesting. I was stationed there in the Navy in 71 through 75. And the Japanese influence was just beginning, and I suspect now it's even more overpowering. So, and they're so anti-cannabis, it's ridiculous. It was interesting you bring that up. I'd like you to comment for that a little bit more, and also I just want to know if you know Brian Murphy.
I know of Brian Murphy, but our paths hasn't crossed yet for some reason. So, but we're getting there. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But like I said, I'm just glad.
He's an old buddy. He goes back to 1990 days, and he has a lot of history in Hawaii with cannabis. But talk to the folks about the Japanese influence, please.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of work this year with meeting about with every representative there is in the House, and I think there's about 300 of them. We've really been jamming and meeting all the power players, and I brought in I brought in data. I brought in education. I brought in Mark Barnett from the Maine Craft Cannabis Policy. I mean, like, to show them, hey, you guys are holding back on something that's only going to make it worse for yourselves. It's going to engage your black market, which is already probably one of the biggest ones in the world. And you're setting up a recipe for disaster that's already in place. So, you know, stop doing what you're doing. Let the people of Hawaii run this program with some canopy flowering space limits and some super simple stuff to spread equality and kindness and compassion across the state. And so, you know, I think getting into these people's backyards and explaining that to them is really important, so they can't bow out of it. But, you know, guys, I spent about 200 hours in legislation this year alone, and it was freaking mind-boggling. And I know you guys all know because you've been through it, whether it's psilocybin or whether it's cannabis. You're like talking to, and I don't want to insult kindergartners, but I felt like I was talking to kindergartners, you know what I mean, with an agenda. I'm like, oh my God, not only are you guys not educated, you have an agenda here. And so, you know, that's a big thing to kind of change that role and change that world, but also don't jam it down their throats because they fight back hard. So capture them and bring the tears and the stories to them and let them know, hey, it's going to be okay. We care about community. We care about children in drugs. We care about safety. We care about doing this the right way. Let us help you do this, because it can be an amazing cultivation laws given back to the people that lost everything during the Ronald Reagan days. And as anybody knows who's from Big Island, Puna was the capital of the cannabis world in this world and had thriving stores, car dealerships, businesses, communities.
I flew into Hilo
not crystal meth epidemics.
in the 80s and brought back pounds of cannabis to our Oregon market. It was a little cheaper there at the time, but the price went up back in the mid 80s. But I also want to address what Al was talking about. The Japanese culture predominates, both the cultural and the economic lifeblood of the island of Oahu especially. And so they're very conservative, which is unusual because I've been to Japan, went to the International Hemp Environmental Forum there, and they use hemp, rope, and fiber in Shinto religious practices. And in fact, the emperor of Japan has to use hemp, and all the Shinto temples have to use hemp in their ceremonial practices. And when the new king of Japan is coronated, they have to use hemp in their rice ceremony. And it's harvested in a very religious manner. It was covered on TV when they coronated a new king back in 2019. But it's strange how much they absorb. You know, it was Douglas MacArthur, the United States general, that made cannabis illegal in Japan. It wasn't illegal until then, but it's just that conformist attitude that permeates that culture. And I think that's predominant, especially on Oahu, but less so on the other islands. Would you agree, Jason?
Yeah, and I would say not to even blame it on the Japanese people, but you can really blame it on Ronald Reagan when he turned Hawaii into a drug trafficking state in the late 70s, 80s. That really did so much damage. I mean, it just had everybody turning against each other and transformed the whole government. And we still see, funded Operation Green Harvest stuff going on today, flyovers for compliance and stuff. Now we've got them under control and we feel really good about it. But it wasn't too many years ago where we had people doing federal time under Medical Cannabis Act, Roger Christie and people like
Roger
that.
And
it's
Cher are
just
good friends of mine.
insane. I mean, insane. You're like, are you kidding me? The Medical Marijuana Act was around and they still did some.
Yeah,
so,
they said that Roger Christie, who was distributing small amounts of cannabis in Hilo in a religious manner because he's a religious cannabis practitioner, kind of like the Shinto priest. But he was arrested, and they took him and 14 other people to Honolulu, and they held him in jail and said he was a danger to the community for 5 years. They wouldn't even grant this man bail. He'd never been arrested before. He'd only been charged with selling small amounts of cannabis. But they claimed, and the federal courts upheld, that he was a danger to the community and could not be released on trial. So they were trying to make him give in to a plea bargain. And after 5 years in a cell without sunlight that's on the runway of the Honolulu International Airport, a little concrete block there, he finally took their bargain and got out with time served, just about, in some probation. And his wife was then incarcerated for several years after that. So it's just a horrible thing they did to him. But you're right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of corruption here too. And as you speak of that,
that's it.
Currently, our police chief and his wife are now in that federal. Our police chief and his wife are now in that same federal prison. So there's a lot of things that's going on here. But those guys paved the way. You guys paved the way, and it allowed Karawailua to be what it is right now. As we're about 6 years old, and we kind of went through our conspiracy theory days and how we're going to shut this down and what's going to happen. It's done, man. It's over with, and we're moving forward fast and furious. And there's really the federal stuff, all that stuff is just so far behind us, and I'm so thankful. Even when I hear about the World Treaty stuff and stuff, I'm like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. So I'm so stoked, all you guys, really so stoked to meet all you and keep going with this, because Hawaii needs a lot of help, and this is the group that could really help it as well. So
that's one of the things I felt so important about the psilocybin conversation about this piece, is it extends the counterculture. One of the things when we graduated from the Changa Institute, I was really moved because it was right next to Jack's old shop, the Third Eye. Oh. And it just really hit home for me that how this counterculture and how you guys kept this small fight going, that it pushed the legalization effort up and up and up. And sometimes people on the national level, they think it's already legal because it's legal in a few states, but the battle is still ongoing.
Yeah.
And with the psilocybin conversation now, helping helping more people get into the conversation, I look forward to it really extending the conversation for all self-care, for all peoples, vets, everybody. So I really feel it's important. So thank you guys for your work.
Willie T here. Willie T and Jeanette Small have recently been approved as facilitators, licensed facilitators for cannabis therapy. And so it's great to... Psilocybin therapy.
But we believe in cannabis therapy too. So.
Right. So, we had kind of a bunch of glitches as we started this show. This is our first time back in the studio since the pandemic in February of 2020. And not only are we trying to do a multiple guest show here in the studio, we're also trying to bring in Zoom guests from around the country. We've got Al Byrne in Florida, Michael Kravitz in Virginia, Pearson Crosby in Alaska, and Jason Hanley in Hawaii. So we're covering all across the world here, really. And we're going to kind of wrap up right now, but we're going to do a two-part show. So we're going to be back on, we're streaming this live right now, but we're shaping it up for our series. We're going to be back for a second set of shows next week. So our guests remain here. We're going to pick up and start taping again in just a second. But we want to thank our audience for watching and keep working to restore hemp and mushrooms and freedom.
Yeah, freedom. Just freedom straight up.
All right.